Hello, Chitlins. It's your weird Uncle John here again. So, welcome to the next stage. Here we are, deciding where we fit into the new paradigm and all that other fun stuff that we signed up for. One of the things I've noticed a lot online is people talking about social distancing and not being able to, get comfortable with that. Maybe feeling isolated or maybe having some cabin fever or something to that effect. Got a cure for that, I think. Out-of-body experiences. Yeah, I'm going there. So we'll talk a little bit about the history of that, how I picked up on it, and how I think I can teach others how to do it. Had a modicum of success with that, so we'll venture forth. So, out-of-body experiences, I think, have been around ever since mankind was hairy in all the wrong places, and building fires and looking for different things to eat, and may have discovered a mushroom or an herb or something that gave them a disassociative experience. So I think that's been around us for a long time. But anyway, one of the things that has been attributed to an out-of-body experience is having a situation that is overwhelming, and so what your brain will do is kind of shut down. There have been a lot more negative associations than positive associations with that, but I think we all know someone who may have been through a traumatic experience and then they don't quite remember it, or maybe they have altered memories during that event. Maybe they saw that event from a third-party perspective, or maybe like from an overhead view, like from a drone or something to that effect. But you are both the actor and the director of your life. Remember that for later. So when I was a child, had a tough upbringing, physical abuse, and one of those instances was pretty bad, to the point where as I was lying there, it was just kind of like, I wish I was anywhere else but here. And then I wasn't there. I was standing outside myself watching this happen, and it was dispassionate. There was no emotional content. It was more like observation. Okay, this is what's going on now. And in that moment, I didn't have the right words for it, but in that moment, that's when I realized that I was both the actor in my own play as well as the director. And so I could choose to keep acting as the victim, or I could do things to change that script, because I was also the director. So, there were some certain passive-aggressive things I did after that event that helped me change the narrative. My dad used to like opening up a jar of peanut butter and just taking a swipe out of it with his finger, as a snack as he walked to the kitchen. Have you ever noticed a child's penis imprint in the peanut butter? He never made mention of that. So that's kind of one of my little secrets that kept me going on when future incidents occurred. I was like, I know what I'm doing later. So sometimes passive aggressive can help you get through certain things. But I learned that there was the meat suit me, and then there was the me that was like in agreement with the meat suit and decided to travel along with it. And it was like a dream state almost. And sometimes I'd wish for it to happen and it would, and sometimes I'd wish for it and it wouldn't. Sometimes I'd just fall asleep. But maybe 3 years later, I was riding my bike through a neighborhood and somebody was having a garage sale and getting rid of some books. And never met them. I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of books that I've picked up that I just took home. There's libraries are just like strip clubs. They're just a tease. So anyway, I brought these books home, and one of them was called Far Journeys by Robert Monroe. And as I read through it, just kind of skimmed through it initially, I realized that he's doing a lot of stuff that I was already doing. So rather than look at it as a book of fiction, I was looking at it more as a how-to book. So I started reading, started playing. More often than not, I was falling asleep, so I started setting an alarm 10, 15 minutes at a time, and would try to get to that state. Sometimes I just fall right asleep, and then, the alarm would go off and I'd start over again. But I got to a point where I realized that going to sleep was, I thought it was like a fireman's pole. You just are awake and then you're asleep. You just slide down that pole and there you are. I come to realize that it's a ladder though, and that there are certain points in that descent you can step off and be in a different level. So I found myself doing some fairly benign things, checking up on Grandma and Grandpa who, lived maybe 40 minutes away, see what they were doing. A lot of gentle argument about what was being made for dinner and what Grandma was making, what Grandpa wanted to eat. Were usually two different things. Then I started going to friends' homes, and I would go to a friend's home, and then I would say something like, "Show me something interesting." So, one time I found that one of my friends was borrowing one of the neighbors' Playboys, and then he would hide it in his brother's room, his little brother's room, who was maybe 9 or 10 at the time. So I'm sure that there was no way he was going to be reading it, and how he thought that was going to shift the blame or responsibility, I don't know, but he felt he was safe doing it. But I thought it was funny that, he's hiding Playboys in his little brother's bedroom between the bed and the mattress. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. So that was kind of like what I did. I'd pop into places and be like, okay, show me something interesting. One of my friends, I'll make sure I de-identify this. So one of my childhood friends, I don't know if it was a fetish for the material. God, I'm going to hope it was the material. But so he had a pair of his mom's silk panties that he kept to himself for whatever reason. But yeah, it's funny the things people hide. And more often than not, when I would go places and say, show me something interesting, I would see things that they had hidden or thought they had hidden. And sometimes when I try to tell people about, what I'd seen or whatever, they'd be like, oh, someone must have told you, or, you must have been spying on me and saw me hide it or something like that. So it's like I couldn't get away with it. It was a trick, is basically what it boiled down to, is, something. That's how they could explain it. A few years later, I'm in college, and I was still keeping the whole picture on the DL, but every once in a while I would let something slip. And we're sitting there playing cards in the girls' dorm, and cards turn to card games, turn to decks of cards, and someone brought up tarot, and I'd been recently playing around with the tarot deck and threw out a couple of ideas about that. One of the things I said was that tarot is not really used for fortune telling. Tarot is good for asking advice. Sometimes you can ask a tarot deck, what do I need to know? It won't necessarily be about love life or grades or jobs or whatever. Sometimes it's interesting to have a tarot deck do a reading on itself. Getting off tangent there. So anyway, that conversation then led to remote viewing. And I told him, I said, I will review someone's home and I'll come back with enough information that when I tell you what I found, it'll narrow it down. So I made sure that the homes that were under consideration, were homes that were so far away that I couldn't drive there and drive back. So with that in mind, I selected someone's home, and I was calling it bouncing at the time. I didn't know what remote viewing was, or astral projection, or these terms that were out of body. I just was telling myself I'd go to sleep, and instead of going to sleep, I bounced somewhere. So I bounced to this home. Split level ranch, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths upstairs, bath and a downstairs basement area that was kind of like a living room and catch-all sewing room, just hodgepodge of stuff. None of that was really specific. So I said, show me something interesting. And immediately I'm in the basement of the house. My nose is about 2 inches from a wall. And the wall had a small picture frame, but instead of a picture, it was just more walls, like someone hung a empty frame on the wall, which made no sense. So I'm like, okay, you're making me look at this, and I really don't see anything different other than it's just a frame stuck to the wall. But then I noticed that the grain didn't match the surrounding grain. And so then my view pulled back, and I realized I'm looking at a wall that had been built in this basement. And so while the basement wall was made out of cinder block, this wall was actually a freestanding wall, stick built, had pickled wood for paneling, and the paneling didn't match. Like, oh, okay. So I took a look closer at the paneling and realized the paneling was actually, a hole had been cut, and then a piece of paneling had been put back, and then this frame had been built around it to kind of mask the cuts in the wall. Okay, I can see that being kind of interesting. Maybe someone got tired of putting a picture in there to hide this hole, but the hole was there nonetheless. I'm like, well, that's really odd that someone would cut a hole in the wall. But I thought in my mind, this is something that's pretty unique, so I think that'll probably be enough evidence to prove to the crowd that I'd been there. So next day, waiting for class in between classes and sitting in the dorm area, and someone would come out and, hey, John's here. And so a couple of people would come up who was at the party, and they said, so tell us about where you went. And so I began to lay it out exactly like I laid it out to you, and it's a fairly nondescript house, and did get a couple of eyebrow perks when I said, the front of the house doesn't get used. You have a front door, but you don't use it. Everyone comes in through the back door by the garage. Had mentioned that I saw a lot of movie trivia hanging on the walls. Again, a couple popped eyebrows, but nothing really definitive. But when I got down to the basement and said, it looks like someone cut a hole in paneling and then put paneling right back over it, and the paneling didn't match, and that there was a frame around it. Everyone had kind of a quizzical brow, except for one girl, and her mouth was just like a broken Pez dispenser, man. And she's like, well, my dad is an old movie buff, and he collects 8mm films, and so he used to show these films down in our basement. And so the back part of that area was film storage and a projection room, and then he would project against the opposite wall in the basement, which I didn't notice, but it was very clean and painted white, so, for a place to project upon. So yeah, projected and projecting, that was kind of humorous. And then also getting the look of, I don't know how he knew that, but he knew that. And not really sure, was this a trick? Is this something they worked out ahead of time? A lot of quizzical looks, which I appreciated. So I did keep this short. I started dabbling with the variables. Specifically, I would say I want to go to see a friend, or I want to go see Grandma and Grandpa, or I want to check out this place, or I want to go to school. And so when I envisioned these things in my mind, what I was doing is I was seeing here and now. And so when I would go to these places, I would go to the here and now. But I was also doing something else at the same time and doing some ghost hunting. And for one reason, I decided that it would be interesting to see a haunted house when it was in its prime. So I went to this haunted house, and I set my intention to, I want to see this house in its prime, in its glory. I think I said in its glory. And so that's not necessarily where I went, but it was also when I went. And so it was probably 1993, 94 when I was doing this, and I went back to a house that was maybe 1922, 1930, somewhere in there. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful home. I mean, it was a mansion. And like I said in the ghost video earlier, the ghost that was bothering me, I actually got to meet that ghost and talk to that ghost and be deceived by that ghost, be chased by that ghost. So anyway, I learned that when was a variable. And so I started going to places that I knew, and it's like, well, what did this look like 100 years ago? Well, what is this going to look like 100 years from now? And would look at those things. Now, there's a body of people out there that are still on the side of the fence where they want to prove every single thing. And a lot of remote viewing groups, they'll go through these, double blind where, someone sticks a notable location into an envelope and then numbers the envelope, hands them to someone else, who then hands them to a third person with a die, and they'll have some readers in the room. Someone will roll the die, and then that's the number that they pull. So no one in the room knows what that is. One person becomes the handler, and you start writing down what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, the top 5 hits. Then they go compare notes and see, to what degree of veracity I'm beyond the veracity part. I don't need to prove it anymore. I've been doing it for so long that I just know that it works. So I also started dabbling with, if I could dabble with the when of where I was going, let's dabble with the where of when I was going. So I went to the moon, like current day and age. Went to the moon about 100,000 years ago. Have been inside the moon, been inside the Earth, and have also dropped into a couple other planets. So when you say something interesting like, show me something interesting on Mars, or show me something interesting on the other side of the moon, these become some very interesting things to see. And just so you know, there's people, things, stuff out there. Just kind of like when you're driving through a state with a fuzzbuster, sometimes they don't look for people who are speeding. They look for people who have the fuzzbuster or radar detectors. So you put out a signal, and some people are looking for signals. But anyway, I guess the caveat is that if you want to distract yourself from boredom while you're in this COVID situation, I would say now is an excellent time to reach out to a semi-open-minded friend on the internet, then talk to them about what you'd like to try. And so one of you be the viewer, one of you be the viewee, or we'll call them the handler. So for example, I did this situation with a friend of mine who lives in France now, but he was curious about the remote viewing experience. I said, well, I'll demonstrate that for you. I'm a little rusty, but I'll demonstrate it for you. So he put a target object on his kitchen table in France, and I'm here in Durham, North Carolina. So I viewed it. It was kind of a rough go. Got a couple of things I just didn't feel good about. So the next night, did it again. Had a better situation with that. I think I had, I felt more comfortable the second time. I kind of like was getting back in the saddle, so to speak. I was also, saw some of the same things again. So with that, veracity, I guess, of seeing things twice in two in a row, I felt better about it. So I talked to him the third day and said, okay, well, I remote viewed last night, the night before, and here's what I saw. And again, for remote viewing, your brain wants an answer. And so it will keep probing until it is allowed to have an answer. So if I say this thing is made out of metal and it's red and it's associated with fires, then your brain may say, oh, that's a fire extinguisher. And because it's made that decision, then it shuts down. But if it didn't shut down, it may have kept looking and said, oh, I see a ladder attached to it. I see big clunky thick wheels attached to it. There's a cab where 4 or 6 people may ride in it. Well, with all those other variables, you could deduce that maybe it's a fire truck. So you never want to let your brain be satisfied. You want to keep pulling at the threads without trying to make it a picture. So I go to this guy's kitchen and I see a wooden table, and on it he has the object. And so I don't want to know what it is, I want to know what it's about. So I get gauze. wispy, waving, like butterfly wings, just slowly waving back and forth, like butterflies when they're trying to dry their wings. Again, it had something to do with air. Again, it was not hard. It was not like a rock or a stone or a mineral or steel. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Gossamer would be a good adjective. So the materials themselves, it was like I could hold it up to the light, I could see through it. Light was still able to shine through it, but it wasn't transparent. It still was opaque, but still it's like I could see light through it. Stars, very, very, very white, prominent stars, and must have been like a deep space kind of look, because the blue was so blue behind the stars. It was almost like a black. And then also, when I was sketching, just kind of like as I'm thinking of adjectives, my hand kind of does its own thing, and all I was doing was just drawing lines. And so I thought in my mind, is like, this is just my hand being distracted, so my brain could just kind of make some free associations. But I mentioned that that's also what I was doing. And my friend on the other end was quiet for a second. He goes, "John, I put an American flag on the table." Like, okay, I think that's some pretty good hits, I think. Dark blue, white stars, stripes, gossamer, wind, air. So I think it was a pretty good shot. I got him reading more about Robert Monroe and hemisync technology and remote viewing and Project Grill Flame and not Grill Flame, Stargate. But anyway, so now is the perfect time for you to reach out to a friend, tell them about Stargate, tell them about remote viewing, tell them you'd like to teach or learn that. One of you pick out something odd, peculiar, unique, set it someplace incongruous, I don't know, a frying pan in the middle of your bathtub, that type of thing, but designate it as the object. And once you set the intention that that's the object, then invite that person to come find that object. And go back and forth on this, because one of the things you'll figure out too is that as you go back and forth with this and have fun with it and the mystery falls away, both of you will become more accurate. Both of you will become better senders and receivers. And who is actually doing the sending when that person is being kept in the dark? Again, you hand them 6 pictures and a dice, and they roll it. They don't know what they're getting. But a future self knows what they're getting. And so if you're doing these readings through quantum mechanics, where time doesn't exist, or is a current self reading your future friend to pick up this information? Because they'll be sending it, they're just sending it at a different time than when you're actually telling them. If you really want to go down that rabbit hole, I would say look up retroactive causality. But quantum mechanics is a fun thing. It's almost like the world is a holodeck. But anyway, so hey, if you're bored out there, I would recommend trying out some remote viewing. If you try to do this by yourself, then it's more astral projection, the remote viewing. You don't have the veracity that's there. But it all falls under a bigger umbrella called out-of-body experiences. So hope that was useful. You got any questions or comments, give me a shout. And if you want to learn more about the madness that is me, look me up on johnmathis.me, and that'll be down in the comments. So hang in there, have a good time. It's a time to explore and become greater than what you think is the sum of your parts. Have a good one.